Hello, it's Kayla and Whitney again for the second of our three episode three episode series on feminine sexuality. Welcome back, Kayla.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for doing this with me. And today, Kayla, we are going to talk about stepping into your sexual power, specifically for women, your feminine sexual power. And, we were just talking and we were exploring how, what does sexual power mean? Well, to me, it means feeling confident and feeling empowered in the act of sex, in engaging in sex, all of that, right?
Yes.
And we were also mentioning how sexual power isn't limited to literal sexual intercourse. Because when you think about it, sexual power, if you looked at this chakra system, right? We associate sex and sexual power with the sacral chakra, which is in the genital, like sort of your genital groin below the belly button area. However, even though we associate the sacral chakra with sex, that is not what the sacral chakra is limited to. This sacral chakra, really sexual energy, sacral energy is about creation. It's your creative drive. It's like this churning zone where you're like, this is what I want. This is my idea. And this is what I'm starting to create. It's like the boiling pot of like creation. And so is sexual power and sexual energy. So if we want to move that into the zone of actual, physical intercourse and sex, it's talking about how are you in your element of excitement and creation when you're engaging sexually. Because I feel like a lot of the times women specifically aren't in their power when they have sex, and they aren't feeling optimally confident and creative in terms of like, let's do this. Let's literally just become like two energy beings who are just exploring each other and creating this divine, climactic experience. Sometimes it can really be just something that we do our best to go through or to be with it. Like we talked about last episode about, it's something that sometimes we feel we just have to get through it or do it how we're supposed to do it, and not really thinking about what is my sex, right? Like not what is sex in general, but what is my sex experience? And to me, that's sexual power, where it's like, when you step into that bedroom to do it, you're like, let's go. I'm stepping up to the plate. I know what I'm bringing. I know what I want. I know what I like. I cannot wait to get this going, rather than anything less than that.
Yes, for sure. And I think for me as well, just based on my past experiences, part of this is also ensuring there isn't a misuse of power, because that was something I personally struggled with a lot in my early 20s. I hated the fact that men could just go out and like bang women and get these notches on their belt, and it made them like, I don't know, there was this weird hierarchy about it. And women, it was like the opposite. So I was like, I'm going to go and beat men at their own game. I'm going to turn them into the object. I'm going to go chase after them and pursue them. And while it did make me feel a certain sense of power, it was a very misuse of a power that can be really sacred and special.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's one of the struggles that women have had in the past 40, 50, I mean, basically since the 60s, when we went through, the 50s, where we had this like idealized version of life, and especially specifically life in America, where it was like the homemaker wife and the husband, and they have this perfect image marriage and two kids and a dog and this white picket fence house. And then we kind of stepped into, okay, well, women are going to speak up a little more in the 60s, the revolution. However, a lot of that over the years, over the decades of, feminism movement and the different waves was a lot about, just as you described, women feeling like they needed to be empowered like men rather than as women. So it was like, well, I can do this too, just like you said. Like, well, I can go and get a 6-figure job too. I can be on Wall Street. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but it was like trying to fight our way to the front of the masculine line rather than being like, see you guys later. I want to do it the feminine way. I want to try this other way that's more, natural, even though, I mean, in a lot of ways, women are so disconnected from their feminine energy that some of us don't even recognize or wouldn't know what it looks like to follow that more feminine expression or path, right? And I know I've been there too with sex, and I think a lot of women have, where it's like, I can do this, you know, too. I can just like have this casual sex as fun. I can do this as just a way to, I just want to get off and feel good. But like we were talking about last episode, is that, you know, there's a lot that comes with sex for a woman. I mean, let's talk about the list of things. Like, first of all, you could get pregnant, always on the line, whether you use a condom or not. You can get STDs, whether you use a condom or not, still is a possibility. But also there's little things like you can get UTIs, you can get yeast infections. You know, there's just so many things that you have to think about as a woman when you're having sex, that when men, it feels like they just show up and then they leave. And, you know, if they don't ever call you again, then whatever happens to you is not a concern of theirs, you know? So it's like we're trying to force something that isn't even true. Like we can't really just, you know, engage this way as much. I mean, men can get sexual transmitted diseases as well, but they can't get pregnant, and they don't have to worry about all this other stuff going on when they do have sex.
And I've also heard, science is not my forte, but I've read and heard that women have a different hormonal response to sex as well. So we can go in with this, I'm like a woman player mindset, and try to play the same game as men. Then the oxytocin kicks in, then all those bonding hormones kick in. And we have this experience that was meant to be casual. And our bodies and our hormones are like, no, that wasn't casual. That was something. Meanwhile, this guy's got a completely different hormonal response, and he's just like, bye.
Yeah, exactly. And it is biology to a certain degree, where, because if you literally, as it's been used very often, the metaphor that, you know, men's sexual organs are external. So for them, sex is a very external experience. It's like, ooh, yeah, this will feel good for like 5-10 minutes, whatever it takes. Sure, they can go longer, but I'm saying like bare minimum, if they wanted to, they could get off in a few minutes and then be like, wow, whew, good. I got what I needed. And now I can go. And women, like, it's we're barely even aroused in 5 to 10 minutes. It takes a while to get it. I mean, of course we can be aroused even before intercourse, right? We get excited, we get wet, all those things can happen. But like when we're really revving the engines, like women's like sexual situation is very complex, you know, like it can feel almost like an 8-cylinder engine. Like you're just like getting fired up at like the second engine, and your partner could already have climax, and you're like, okay, I guess I'll just like shut down shop and, you know, I won't get as much pleasure. And that's a constant conversation, is around, you know, the discrepancy between, you know, female pleasure and male pleasure, is that the feminine takes a little bit more working. And it's definitely possible to even an extended degree, right? Because women can have multiple orgasms, but it takes some finessing and some work and figuring out. And so talking about being in your power, that also means like being open to exploring like what gets you off, what gets you aroused, what brings you pleasure, and how do you get to that point where you feel comfortable and confident about, you know, exploring that and generating that energy.
Yes, and I think for women, we often have to be more creative and more resourceful than men when it comes to having orgasms. I know for me personally, it's very hard to have an orgasm without some kind of electricity. And like it's happened like once or twice in my
At least there's
entire
some
life.
that are chargeable, but they required energy in the first place. Yeah, go ahead.
And for a while there, I was like, what is so wrong with me? Why can't I just like have an orgasm from all these other things that like other women do? And it was actually another woman I had on my podcast back in February of this year. She talked all about, well, she had this great analogy of a woman's clitoris is like analogous to like a man's penis, but most of the clit is like underneath
it's
the
inverted.
surface.
It's essentially inverted into the vagina. We have a penis, which is our clit, but it's just in there, and it's all just nerve endings within the vagina.
Exactly. So she explained a lot of women need vibrating toys of some kind because that's the only way you're going to get deeper into the stimulation. So I was like, oh, that was just such a good thing to hear, to like release that expectation of I should be able to get off from these other things that other women can, because we're all so different.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that again goes back to women stepping into their power, which is especially early on in a relationship. Or, I mean, if we're talking about like trying to do a one night stand, a one night hookup, a thing like that, it can be hard to be like, okay, so this is what I like, and can we try this? And this is, it can feel just like this very like clumsy sort of like, okay, we're going to go for this. And I guess I'm just going to, I have a lot of requests, but looks like we're just going to go and now we're done. You know what I mean? And it's not
Mhm.
always like that. But again, the earlier in a courtship or relationship, it can be hard to voice. And I think in general, that's a challenge for women being in their power with sex, is you have to voice. Again, with men, there's not always a whole lot of requests. There might be certain things that turn them on more than others. They like butt stuff. They like this stuff, whatever. That's their forte. But no pun intended. However, with women, it can really be like, you know what? This position does not work for me. And this is never going to get me off. And I actually need this to get me on. But when we're just starting with somebody, it can be hard to voice that. Or even, once we've been dating someone for a while, some women never really feel that comfortable in saying what they need, or even getting to that point where they know what they need. And I think that, I have a lot of friends who could kind of take it or leave it with sex. And I think that there's something to say that everyone has different levels of interest, sexual drives. But I think that some of it might just be never feeling comfortable in exploring it. Because all humans have sexuality. It is a part of who we are. But yet if something's happened to us, especially if something ever happened at a young age, any form of abuse, or at any age really, assault or abuse, it can really shut down our systems. Because once we don't feel safe with sex, we associate it with a lack of safety, a very, uncomfortable thing, then it can be hard, even when we're in a safe environment, to let go of that kind of guard, right?
Yes, definitely. So I think you touched on something extremely important is one, if women, hey, never discover what they really like about sex. So what's their 10 out of 10? Maybe they've only to this point experienced their 3 out of 10 because they haven't figured out, okay, this is like what makes sex a 10 out of 10 for me. And then B, how do they have those conversations with their partners from that place of empowerment and all those good things?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So how do we encourage or help women who feel ready to take that step? Because I offer that this is in no means trying to say that every woman should be in their power with sex. It's your choice. Honestly, I think there's a lot of women who are like, I don't know, I just don't really think about it, and it's not a big deal. And I think that that's fine. But if you are, for those who wish to hear, for those who are curious, I think that there are ways to get more in touch with your sexual power. So Kayla, I would be curious, could you share a bit about when have you felt in your power sexually, and when have you maybe not? I know that you've said that sort of like male analogy where like when you tried the masculine way, you're like, this is so forced and doesn't feel authentic to me. But what has felt kind of authentic?
What's felt authentic to me is A, having sex and getting into a sexual relationship for reasons that feel right to me as 33-year-old Kayla. Obviously, 20-year-old Kayla had different reasons, but now I've really outgrown that need for like the casual flings. And it's funny, when I left my last serious relationship back in 2020, my best friends are pushing hard for me to get on Tinder. They're like, get on there. You haven't been with a man in 8 years. Go get some, blah, blah, blah. I was like, but I don't want to. I want to wait for true love because I had feelings for my now fiance. And they're like, no, go get on there. So I went on there, had a couple conversations with guys, and I was like, I just am not into this at all. So I think it's knowing what you need at a certain stage and then honoring that need. And then the other part that's been really valuable for me is having those authentic conversations with my partner before we ever even had sex. This is what I like. What do you like? What are your preferences? And because we had those conversations before ever undressing in front of each other, the sex is definitely a 10 out of 10. And I think it can be that way for most women if that's something they very much desire.
Yeah, absolutely. As in everything, communication is so key to getting what we want, because without it, there's no possible way, especially with sex. People aren't just going to know what you like and what works for you unless you voice it. And so I think that maybe some advice is like to start small for those who kind of feel maybe a little bit uncomfortable with sharing, and but it can also be made into something fun, because I think, most people will find that if you put it out there, like, hey, I'd like to find ways with you to have heightened experience of sex, they'd probably be like, yeah, let's do it, you know? And there's all sorts of things out there. There's sex coaches, there's sex groups, there's, you know, all sorts of workshops and everything to like find your heightened sexual experience.
That's a really powerful point, because the partners in our life, whether it's male or female, most of them, unless they're like some crazy narcissist, they want us to have a delightful time in the bedroom. That's going to make them
Yes.
feel better.
Yes.
So when you say, hey, I want to have the best sex possible with you, can we start exploring this? Can we try this? They're going to be like, yes, of course, because
Yes.
it's good for their ego to give their person a great sexual experience as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the most exciting parts about sex, is to watch your partner have pleasure, like watch your partner, you know, reach this peak state of pleasure. And you're like, ooh, you know, we're doing this for each other. Like, this is the effect I'm having on you. That's awesome. And this is the effect you have on me. And yeah, so I think most people will be open to that if you just offer. But the thing is that people don't know unless you say something. A guy might think, because again, I think it's because the guy's having a great time, I think they do assume that the woman is too, because they're like, yeah, she's loving this. They don't know that sometimes it's not stimulating us, you know, the way that they might think it is. That we're not constantly moving towards climax in certain positions, or with certain, or with just penetration. A lot of women can't climax with just penetration. Like you said, we need our little buddies, those little toys, to kind of help us, because, you know, our primary spot is the clitoris. And even though the clitoris does, I had a wonderful certified sex therapist on my show, and she gave like the whole rundown on the anatomy of the clitoris, and it does go, it's like a U, again, it's like an inverted penis. So there's a lot of it, even though it seems small. That's just like the tip part, the iceberg that comes out, and you can like work on it externally. But it's also what's being impacted if you do anything anal. Like that's also like the base of the clitoris that you're hitting. That's why women get pleasure from anal. So yeah, so there's all kinds of things you can play with. And again, most people will love to play around with that stuff, right? If you ask.
Yes. And one of the best purchases I've ever made in my entire life is a vibrating C-ring, because then you're able to have an orgasm while getting penetrated. And that, like, your partner loves that. I love it. Like, it's just a great time.
Now, a vibrating C-ring, does it go on their penis?
Yeah, so the ring wraps around the penis, and then it's got this additional like piece that sits on the woman's clitoris, and it vibrates.
Okay.
So that you're getting the clitoral stimulation while having sex, which is super cool.
Awesome. Yeah, there's so many great toys out there, and there's so many to play with, and different women like different kinds. So I say, like, have at it. They also have like sex toy parties now. Well, they're like give you a demo on. My friend did that once. It's kind of like a Mary Kay type party, but with sex toys, which is a good time.
Absolutely. Yes, that was actually the woman I had on the podcast. She does the pure romance sex toy
Oh,
party. So
okay. There you go. There you go. So yeah, I think that that's a big part of it, is like playing around with what you like and being able to ask for what you want and what you like.
yes.
And then being able to, you know, feel like you can show up authentically. Right. Because I think that's, if I was going to say like when I felt most empowered or disempowered, I think that I feel most empowered when I don't feel like I have to perform, or I don't feel like here's another thing that I want to say. It's when I don't feel like I have to win someone over or impress somebody, because, and this opens up sort of a bigger conversation, which is, when do you really feel safe in becoming sexually intimate with someone? And there are so many there's such a big spectrum of people saying like, have sex in the first night, after 5 months, it doesn't matter. Do it whenever you want, which is true. But I will say that I found that if I try to engage sexually too early, which is hard not to do, right? Because especially if you have like strong chemistry, like that sexual tension, and you're just like, I want to. But I found that the earlier I have sex, the more I'm in my head and not in my body. And I think that's also a big part of being in your power, is when you're not all up in your head, right? And I remember someone saying once, they said, women are thinking clearest before sex, and men are thinking clearest after sex, right? So before sex, women are like, okay, do we have the condom? Should I do this? Should I not do this? And all men are thinking are like, sex might happen. Yes, sex. And then afterwards, men are just like, whatever, it's over. Now let's go do something different. And they can think clearly because they got the sex. And women are just like, oh my gosh, like now, is this going to work out? Is it not going to work out? You know? So with that said, I think that it's, again, something that people have to figure out for themselves is what's your, parameters around when you're ready to be intimate with someone. I've heard, again, I listen to so many dating and relationship podcasts, and I've heard people say, don't even kiss someone for 3 months. And there is good
Wow.
reason behind this. It's because women literally don't think clearly anymore. As soon as, just like you said, that oxytocin is created, like, oh my God, this connection, this closeness with this person, I want more. Maybe they're my, my person to build with, to create with, because that's a woman's intuition. A woman's natural nature is to procreate with a man. A man's natural nature is to seed someone, to procreate, not necessarily to stick around. They often will and will love to. Men, everybody likes to be partnered. A lot of studies will show that, even though there's more single people than ever, that people are happiest and healthiest when they're partnered with somebody. There are studies now that say like single women without kids are the happiest in like their 30s and 40s. But I think most people will say that they would love to have somebody in their life, right? So it's not to say that men don't want to be with you, but after like one time having sex, women are going to be much more inclined to be like, is this something that's going to like, that I can grow? And men are likely to be like, okay, I like this or I didn't, but I'm moved, not always thinking in that way in a long-term regard. So I offer this in that I think in being in your power is, like I said, there's 100 different ideas around this, but figuring out what's true for you, because I think that's another reason why it's hard for women to define their relationship with sex. And what allows them to be in their power is because we often just take from what other people say rather than going within. And that's such a big part of feminine energy in general, is your sovereign truth, kind of taking a moment, and that's why stuff like meditation is so important, is it's like, you're kind of letting the rest of the world fall away and saying, what's true for me, And maybe it is like, wow, I realized that if I even kiss someone before like 2 months, I'm not even thinking clearly. Or maybe it's, what? I love getting to know somebody sexually in the first week. It helps me understand how I feel about them, how I feel with our bodies, and it helps me to know whether it's something I want to build or not. But only each individual can know for themselves what's true.
It would be interesting to have people experiment with this and play with this, because as you're talking, I'm thinking 99% of my male-female relationships, we were kissing, we were having sex very quickly afterwards. And my relationship with my now fiance, we knew each other for well over 2 years before it became romantic in nature. So we didn't have our first kiss until we had known each other for like 2.5 years. So by then I already knew like this man is amazing. And it was probably more of a true knowing, because there wasn't the hormones and the oxytocin getting in the way and creating this filter almost on our perception of a person.
Absolutely. It's wild, isn't it? To think like just how different it is. And I think that's why so many of us yearn to meet someone organically and as sort of like a friend first, and then have it, because then it really is like this, you watch it in stages, and it's rather than like this sort of pressure to be like, after a few dates, let's say like someone that you got set up with and you're like, okay, is this going anywhere? Should I keep dating them? If it's just kind of organic and you just start noticing like, what is this? Like, why am I starting to feel this way about someone, rather than feeling like you need to force it because you've started dating somebody and you don't, it's like, do I keep going with this? Do I, pull the plug? So yeah, I think that it's, again, something for people to consider when they're thinking about stepping into their sexual power, is what makes you feel most, invigorated, most, in your essence and authentic. Right. I remember one time I did a workshop on authenticity, and I brought up that so often women feel like they can't show up authentically in sex. And I had this other woman that was there raise her hand, and she said, actually, when I'm having sex, that's the most authentic I ever feel, because she has a husband that she loves and feels safe with. So she's totally in her power. So when she's having sex, it's like I said, like when you can drop from the mind to the body, you're just going, you're just your energy, and you're just like doing what feels good, and you're in it, and it's amazing. And to me, that's when you're literally in your power, because you're more energetic than cognitive, right? You're more energy than cerebral. You're not thinking things through, you're just being. And that's when people have tantric sex.